We also seek refuge with Allah against the ills that we have within ourselves and against the sins that we perpetrate outwardly. If Allah guides any person, none can misguide such an individual. And if Allah leaves any person in misguidance, none can guide such an individual. In addition, I testify that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah alone, without any partner. And I testify that Muhammad is Allah's worshipping servant and messenger. May Allah grant commendation, protection, and blessings to our Prophet Muhammad, as well as to his family, his companions, and all who continue following their path until the day of recompense. Before we begin, for those who may not have the material that we plan to cover in these lessons, inshallah, I think it has been sent around, but just for those who would like that information, there's a short link that you can access the information by way of the handout. It is tiny.cc/bmfast, BM standing for Bulughul al-Maram. tiny.cc/bmfast, tiny.cc/bmfast. In these lessons, today and tomorrow, with Allah's assistance and by His permission, we would like to cover Kitab al-Siyam, the chapter about fasting, from a book called Bulughul al-Marami Min Adillah al-Ahkam. Bulughul al-Marami Min Adillah al-Ahkam is a book by a scholar commonly known as Ibn Hajar. May Allah have mercy upon him. And his book, we rendered its title into English as Achieving Our Objectives from Evidences of Islam's Directives. That's basically what his title means, Achieving Our Objectives from Evidences of Islam's Directives. And as I came here to the center today, I was kind of browsing through the library, and I saw this book here. It's called Subul al-Salam. It's called Subul al-Salam, Subulu al-Salami al-Musilatu ila Bulugh al-Marami. Subul al-Salami al-Musilatu ila Bulugh al-Marami. This is an explanation of Bulugh al-Maram by Ibn Hajar. This explanation is written by a scholar. His name is Muhammad ibn Ismail al-San'ani. May Allah have mercy upon him. May Allah have mercy upon all of our scholars. Many of the comments that I am going to make as we read these ahadith and mention a brief explanation regarding them, many of the comments are based on material that's in the same explanation right here. And before we begin, I would like to express my gratitude to those who are in charge of the center here, Jum'iyya Ahle-Hadith Biknada, and those who are in charge of it, those who oversee it, and those who are involved in it. May Allah reward them immensely, and may Allah accept their efforts. And I beseech Allah as well to reward them for thinking well enough of me to allow me to be part of the activities that they present, or the content that they present, for the benefit of Islam and its people by Allah's assistance. We begin with the heading, and of course, I think we're all aware, the point of us covering this chapter of the book at this time, because Ramadan is approximately a week away, so I think we're all aware of that. And I'm sure that the reminders in lessons and in khutbahs and in the other things that people have access to, they will have lots of reminders about things to keep in mind during Ramadan. So what we're going to do is cover a hadith. This book, Bulugh al-Maram, it's a book that has a hadith. And ahadith is the plural of the word hadith. Hadiths, if you want to put it that way. And the author or the compiler, Ibn Hajar, he has arranged them in a certain way under chapters by topic. So we're going to cover the ahadith he put in this book related to fasting. And these ahadith basically serve as the basis for a lot of issues that we find that are related to fasting. Not necessarily all issues, but a lot of them. A lot of them. And it is our purpose in these lessons to read the ahadith themselves. We will mention what some of the scholars have said regarding their authenticity in the event that any of them were graded inauthentic by some of the scholars. And we will be making some brief remarks, like we said. It won't be a thorough explanation. It will be some brief remarks in order for us to contextualize what is mentioned in these texts from the Sunnah so that we can proceed ahead when Ramadan comes with this knowledge by Allah's favor. We begin with the heading which says Kitabu Siyami. Kitabu as-Siyami. Now, we began with an introductory note here in which we mentioned, this is on page 1 of the handout, footnote number 1. We said that in these lessons, we will only be reading the texts of the ahadith, the texts of the ahadith, not the other information mentioned along with them by Ibn Hajar in Bulugh al-Maram. So what is the other additional information he mentioned? We said here, such as the original source books that contain these ahadith. Ibn Hajar mentioned that, but for these lessons, we will not be discussing that. All of the ahadith we will read are authentic, except for the ones where we point out that the scholars of hadith have graded them otherwise. For the purposes of these lessons, we will be mainly relying on the authenticity gradings assigned by Sheikh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani, as found in the critical edition of Bulugh al-Maram, prepared by Sheikh Isam Musa Hadi and published by Dar as-Siddiq. The brief explanatory remarks that will be presented in these lessons have been drawn from commentaries that scholars have written for various hadith collections and compilations. Many of our explanatory remarks, many, not all, but many, contain material drawn from a commentary for Bulugh al-Maram that is entitled Subul al-Salam by al-Asqalani, which we mentioned earlier. May Allah have mercy upon the aforementioned scholars and upon all the scholars of Islam. Kitabu Siyami, we said this means in English, chapter about fasting. Chapter about fasting. Now we want to discuss what fasting is. We want to have a general idea of how the scholars define fasting. We said here in the next note that fasting in Islam refers to, now remember this very carefully, the first detail we're going to mention. Fasting in Islam refers to worshiping Allah by doing some things. Remember this carefully. Worshiping Allah. Fasting is an act of worship. By willfully refraining throughout the daytime. Daytime means it begins at dawn and ends at sunset. That's what we mean by daytime. Beginning at dawn, ending at sunset. Refraining throughout that time from eating, drinking, intercourse, and other things that a fasting person is prohibited from, as outlined in the texts of Islam. And those texts of Islam, we're going to be reading a number of them in this chapter, insha'Allah, if Allah wills. While fasting, one should also be even more careful than usual to avoid foul speech and sinful actions overall. One should be even more careful than usual. We're not saying these things nullify a person's fast. Foul speech does not nullify a person's fast. Sinful actions do not nullify a person's fast. But while fasting, a person should be more careful to avoid those things. That's about fasting in general. All right? We said that it's worshiping Allah by willfully refraining from some things throughout the daytime. Throughout the daytime. So what were those things? We said eating, drinking, intercourse, and other things that are prohibited as outlined in the text of Islam. This is the idea that relates to fasting in general, at any time. With respect to Ramadan, we wrote here that fasting the month of Ramadan became obligatory in the second year after Hijrah. The second year after Hijrah. Hijrah meaning the migration of the Prophet to Medina, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. May Allah mention the Prophet with commendation and grant him protection. If the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam fasted Ramadan for the first time when it became obligatory, we said it was made obligatory in the second year after Hijrah. How many Ramadans did he fast? 10, 8, 9. Okay, when did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam pass away? The year 11? 63? That was the age, that was how old he was. But he passed away in the year 11, that's right. What month? Anyone? He passed away in the month Rabi'un al-Awwal. Rabi' al-Awwal. All right. So Rabi' al-Awwal is the month, is which month? It's the third month, right? Muharram, Safar, Rabi' al-Awwal. Good. So that means Ramadan would have been after it. So in the year 11, he did not fast Ramadan, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we have from the year 2 until the year 10. How many is that? How many? 8. Count them. Remember, when you're going to count, when you're going to take a difference, you have to include one of the numbers you're counting, right? 9. If we're not clear, we'll count them on our hands just to make sure, okay? It's 9. The year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 9 Ramadans, right? 9 Ramadans. Okay. So that's how many the Prophet ﷺ fasted. Now, that was regarding fasting in general, definition, and a little bit about when Ramadan became, or when fasting, the days of Ramadan became obligatory. The first hadith says, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تقدموا رمضان بصوم يوم ولا يومين إلا رجل كان يصوم صوما فليصمه. Before we go on to the English, just something maybe some of you might be familiar with, for those who have attended other lessons at the center, Allah knows best. I'm going to be reading these ahadith based on the text that's presented here, which is from Bulughul al-Maram. But when we read ahadith, like this thing I just read, it says, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال, and it continues. Does anyone know when you're reading a hadith how you're actually supposed to read that? This would be, I guess people who see the text in front of them, this would be more conducive to answering.
Can you repeat the question, John?
The text here says, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال to the end of it. When you read this in an actual book of hadith, especially if the isnad is coming, or the isnad precedes it, but even here, there's something that's sort of omitted that you're supposed to say. It says radiyallahu anhu here, so we're not talking about that, because sometimes they don't write that, but you're supposed to say it when you read it verbally. There's something else. Anyone know? No? No, here it's a word actually. You see here, what you're supposed to say is عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه. You're supposed to say أنه قال. أنه قال. And inshallah, maybe for those who, some might be familiar, and more, inshallah, as the days progress, bi'idhnillah, as more hadith lessons will be presented, I think this may come up as the hadith texts are being read. However, for simplicity, for our purposes here, I'm just going to read it the way that it's written as presented in the handout, and this is the way it is in Bulughul al-Maram, for simplicity. But in reality, it will be better for us and more accurate, as the scholars mentioned in books of Ulum al-Hadith, that when you read this, you say, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أنه قال to the end of it. Okay, the English for this hadith, which is number 526 in the copy we're using, says, that Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, narrated that Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, said, "You must not fast the day or two immediately before the beginning of Ramadan." You must not fast the day or two immediately before the beginning of Ramadan. The only exception is a person whose regular practice is to fast certain days, and those days coincide with the day or two immediately prior to Ramadan. In such a case, that person is still allowed to fast those days. We'll read that again. Just the statement of the Prophet alayhi as-salatu was-salam. You must not fast the day or two immediately before the beginning of Ramadan. That's a default. Now an exception is mentioned. The only exception is a person whose regular practice is to fast certain days, and those days coincide with the day or two immediately prior to Ramadan. In such a case, that person is still allowed to fast those days. We're going to go down to the notes we had here. We gave an example of one instance because this hadith says the only exception is a person whose regular practice is to fast certain days. So we said in note number 3 here on page 1, an example of fasting certain days as a regular practice is someone who regularly fasts Mondays and the last or second last day of Sha'ban happens to be a Monday. You fast Monday every week, it's your regular practice. And then what happens is, the way Allah decrees for things to be, is that the last day of Sha'ban, or the second last day of Sha'ban, is a Monday. That is a scenario to which this hadith would apply. So what does it say? In such a case, that person is still allowed to fast those days. So we said here that from this hadith we understand that the prohibition mentioned is general. The prohibition mentioned first is general, and the only type of person exempted is the one whose regular practice of supererogatory fasting coincides with the day or two immediately prior to Ramadan. There may be some individuals who want to fast a day or two immediately prior to the expected beginning of Ramadan as a precautionary measure, so as to not miss any of the days that could potentially be part of Ramadan. Some people might think this. I'm not really sure, maybe I might miss a day. I just want to be on the safe side. However, we said here this is not something prescribed by Islam. Beginning to fast Ramadan is to be based on the prescribed ways of ascertaining that the lunar month Sha'ban has ended. This is how we're supposed to begin fasting. There are ways. There are 2 ways, and we're going to talk about these now. We said those will be discussed in the upcoming narrations. So we move on now to number 527. It says, عن عمار بن ياسر رضي الله عنه قال من صام اليوم الذي يشك فيه فقد عصى أبا القاسم صلى الله عليه وسلم. Ammar ibn Yasir, may Allah be pleased with him, stated, if someone fasts the day about which there is doubt, he has indeed disobeyed Abu al-Qasim, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection. The day of doubt. Now here we wrote in the note regarding this hadith that a lunar month may have either 29 days or 30 days. It may have 29 days at the very least, 30 days at the very most. That's how lunar months work. Now in this hadith we had something called the day of doubt. So we said the day about which there is doubt mentioned in this hadith refers to the 30th of Sha'ban in the event that people tried to sight the new moon on the eve of the 30th, but it was obscured from view by clouds or other similar things. We know what the eve of a day is, right? Like for example, what day are we in right now? What day of the week is it? Today. Today is Saturday, right? Today is Saturday. And in Arabic, we'll call that Yawm al-Sabti. Yawm al-Sabti. Good. When Maghrib time comes, after the adhan is called, or when the adhan starts being called, what would be called that period of time? No. In English, we would say what? Tomorrow is what?
Sunday.
Sunday. Okay, good. If you are in the nighttime before a day, what do you call that in English?
Sunday evening.
No, we'd say the eve of Sunday. You're on the eve of Sunday. Sunday evening would be the late part of Sunday itself. But the eve of Sunday, that's Saturday night, basically. That's Saturday night. Now, in Arabic, when Maghrib time comes, after it's Maghrib time, what do we call that in Arabic? We would call that Laylatul al-Ahadi. Laylatul Ahad. Laylatul Ahad does not mean Sunday night. Laylatul Ahad means the eve of Sunday. The eve of Sunday. Okay? Sunday eve, if you want to put it that way. We clear about that? There's a difference between eve, Sunday eve, and Sunday evening. There's a 24 hours difference between those two things. Right? So we're saying here, we said that what's going on here is the day about which there is doubt mentioned in this hadith refers to the 30th of Sha'ban in the event that people try to sight the new moon on the eve of the 30th. The eve of the 30th, meaning tomorrow is supposed to be the 30th. So that means you go tonight to see if the crescent marking the beginning of the month is visible. The eve of the 30th. But it's obscured from view by clouds or other similar things, meaning that the sky is not clear. It's the eve of the 30th, but the sky is not clear for whatever reason. Consequently, the following day could possibly be part of Ramadan in reality, right? The crescent might be there, but something obscured our view. It obscured it from our view. So what does Islam say about a situation like that? We have here, consequently, the following day could possibly be part of Ramadan in reality. However, according to the teachings of Islam, fasting must not begin until either, Walaikum assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Fasting must not begin until either 1, the new moon is seen, or 2, Sha'ban is completed as 30 days. These are the two methods we have here. These are the two methods for determining when to begin fasting, and these will be mentioned in the next hadith. So these are our two methods for knowing when a lunar month begins. You either see the crescent or you complete the month you're in as a full 30 days. You do not say, well, you know what? Tonight is the eve of the 30th. I didn't see the moon, so you know what? Let's just be on the safe side. This is not what Islam's teachings say, right? The next hadith is going to clarify that in a very outright manner. Number 528 we'll move on to. 528 has a number of sections. All of the hadith, they're basic. It's one basic hadith, narrated from two different companions, but the wordings are all very similar. They're very similar. So it says here, عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إذا رأيتموه فصوموا وإذا رأيتموه فأفطروا فإن غم عليكم فاقدروا له. Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with both of them, said, I heard Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, say, when you see the new moon of Ramadan, begin the month of fasting. That's what that expression means. إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَصُومُوا. That means when you see the new moon of Ramadan, begin the month of fasting. وَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَأَفْطِرُوا. And when you see the new moon of Shawwal, end the month of fasting. If the new moon is obscured from your view, count the month as having the full number of days that it could have. If the new moon is obscured from your view, count the month as having the full number of days that it could have. This hadith is authentic and it's very clear about what should be done. Another narration of the same hadith contains the wording, فَإِنْ أُغْمِيَ عَلَيْكُمْ فَاقْدُرُوا لَهُ ثَلَاثِينَ. If the new moon is obscured from your view, count the month as having 30 days. So this clarifies what the previous wording said, having the full number of days that it could have. How many is that? 30. An additional narration contains the wording فَأَكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ ثَلَاثِينَ. Complete the number of days as 30. All of these wordings were narrated from Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with both of them. A similar wording also came from Abu Hurairah. It says, the narration from him contains the wording فَأَكْمِلُوا عِدَّةَ شَعْبَانَ ثَلَاثِينَ. This one actually mentions Sha'ban in particular. Jazakallahu khairan. Complete the number of days in Sha'ban as 30. All right? So we have these wordings. They're all very similar, and I think the idea came out kind of clearly from these texts. So we wrote a note here regarding these. Actually, just quickly here, what did we have? Footnote number 2. It says, when you see the new moon of Ramadan. This is in narration 528a. Regarding the phrase, when you see the new moon of Ramadan, begin the month of fasting. We wrote here in footnote 2, in other words, begin fasting on the day following the night when the new moon is sighted. That's what that means, fasumu. Because a person, maybe those of us, we start learning some Arabic, we read this, it says, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَصُومُوا. If we don't refer to what scholars say, and we just start learning a couple of Arabic words, we might try to work this out according to our understanding without referring back to scholars, which is incorrect, but for argument's sake. This says, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ. If you see, or when you see that new moon, فَصُومُوا. What does that mean? A person might understand that to mean, go ahead and fast. But when do you see the moon? You see the moon at night, right? Fasting is not something that we do at night. Fasting is something you do in the day. So to make that clear, right? So this is why we mention here. What this means is, like we said in other words, begin fasting on the day following the night when the new moon is sighted. This is what that phrase in the hadith should be understood to mean. Now, these narrations in number 528 with its various sections, we said these narrations show, this is footnote number 3 on page 2, these narrations show that beginning, the month of fasting, is to be based on seeing the new moon of Ramadan in the event that it is visible when the 29th day of Sha'ban concludes, right? In the event that it's visible. So what happens if it's not? That's what comes next. If the new moon is not seen, regardless of whether the sky at that time is clear or not, so long as you didn't see the moon, Sha'ban is to be completed as 30 days, and fasting is to begin the day after the 30th. This is what we understand from these hadith. Similar applies to determining the conclusion of Ramadan. This hadith was about the beginning of Ramadan, right? It said, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَصُومُوا. That means when you see the new moon for marking the beginning of that month, you begin the month of fasting. So this hadith is about Ramadan. But our note here, we said similar applies to determining the conclusion of Ramadan and beginning of Shawwal. This concept applies to any month. We also added here regarding seeing the moon, we wanted to point this out. A related aspect of the sunnah to be kept in mind is that it was authentically narrated that when the Prophet ﷺ, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, would see the new moon of any month in general, he would say the following supplication: Allahumma ahillahu alayna bil yumni wal imani was salamati wal islami. O Allah, we implore you to make the new moon rise over us while we are in a state of happiness along with inward acceptance of the truth from you, as well as a state of protection along with outward submission to you. He would then address the moon and say, Rabbi wa Rabbuka Allahu, the one supreme Lord over me and the one supreme Lord over you is Allah. Before continuing this note, I want everyone to notice something here because there's an idea that I think many of us might be familiar with. You see, this hadith says, or this dua, Allahumma ahillahu alayna bil yumni wal imani was salamati wal islami. Does anyone notice two words here that come together in this text that have a certain meaning when they're together and have certain meanings when they're not together? Allahumma ahillahu alayna bil yumni wal imani was salamati wal islami.
Iman wa Islam.
Good. Al-Iman and Al-Islam. When these two words are used on their own, when you see the word Al-Islam used or Muslim used, that means someone who submits to Allah in general, someone who submits to Allah inwardly and outwardly. Okay, when Islam is used on its own, it means submission to Allah inwardly and outwardly. Both of these dimensions are part of that understanding. Similarly, when the word Iman is used, Iman has to do with acceptance of the truth and compliance with it, both, right? Islam has to do with submission. The Muslim is somebody who submits. Iman has to do with two basic things, accepting and complying. Accepting and complying. But this is accepting and complying both inwardly and outwardly as well. That's what Iman means. So a mu'min is somebody who accepts the truth from Allah and he complies with it inwardly and outwardly. That's when the word is used on its own. But whenever you have an ayah, whenever you have a hadith where you see both words together, like this one, it says bil-yumni wal-imani was-salamati wal-islami. You have Iman here and Islam here. When these two words are used together in a hadith or an ayah, does anybody know what they mean? Anyone? Iman refers to the inward, and Islam refers to the outward. Okay? That's what happens when they're used together. So this is why when we came to express the meaning of this dua in English, when we said bil-yumni wal-imani, we said while we are in a state of happiness along with inward acceptance. Because here Iman is talking about the inward. Was-salamati wal-islami, as well as a state of protection along with outward submission to you. Right? So this, when we put them together, Iman involves the inward, and Islam involves the outward. But when they're individual, if they weren't mentioned together, only one of them is mentioned, it means both inward and outward. All right? Is that idea is okay? We okay with that idea? Inshallah, I hope so. All right. That was about, there was a note we wanted to add here regarding the last phrase of the hadith, in which the Prophet ﷺ, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, would address the moon. He would address the moon and say, Rabbi wa Rabbuka Allahu. The one supreme Lord over me as a human being, and the one supreme Lord over you, the moon up in the sky, is Allah. Scholars have mentioned that the reason behind this remark about the moon is that among the people during the era of ignorance prior to Islam, there were those who worshipped the sun and the moon. By making that remark, by saying the one supreme Lord over me and the one supreme Lord over you is Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, annulled their beliefs and stated that the moon is just like any human in the sense that it is under the control of its one supreme Lord, Allah, and it is unable to bring about any sort of harm or benefit. Thus, only Allah deserves all worship, and nothing besides Him deserves any form of worship. This is what we wanted to say regarding the various wordings of narration or hadith 528. We'll move on now to 529. عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال تراءى الناس الهلال فأخبرت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أني رأيته فصام وأمر الناس بصيامه. Abdullah bin Umar, may Allah be pleased with both of them, said, people were trying to sight the new moon, marking the beginning of Ramadan, And I informed Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, that I had seen it. As a result, he himself began the month of fasting, and he instructed the people to begin the month of fasting as well. Note these words carefully. He himself began the month of fasting, and he instructed the people to begin the month of fasting as well. In our notes here, we said that from this hadith, we understand that beginning the month of fasting can take place based on the sighting reported from just one single person who is known for his integrity and for transmitting reliable information. One person is enough, right? Abdullah bin Umar, he said, the people were trying to sight the new moon, and I informed, he says, I informed Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection, that I had seen it. As a result, he himself began he himself began the month of fasting, and he instructed the people to begin the month of fasting as well. Before moving on to the next hadith, I want to ask a quick question here. This phrase involves a couple aspects of the sunnah, or the definition, according to the definition that the scholars of hadith give for hadith or for the sunnah. Can anybody kind of pick those out for me? I'm going to read the statement carefully. He himself began the month of fasting, and he instructed the people to begin the month of fasting as well. There are two things there. Anybody know what parts of the definition of hadith or sunnah we see in that phrase?
He himself.
What's that?
He himself.
He himself.
If he not do, no one will do.
Okay, so he himself did something. Does anybody know what, either in English or in Arabic, does anybody know what that's called? Right. It's called a taqreer. It's called, I'm sorry, no, incorrect. That's not right. My mistake. That's incorrect. It's not taqreer. He did something.
Can you repeat the question? Repeat the question.
Amal. The brother mentioned it there. My question was, before I repeat the question, does anybody know there are four basic things that the scholars talk about when defining a hadith or the word sunnah, when we talk about how the scholars of hadith define it? One, qawlun. The Prophet ﷺ says something. Two, amal. The Prophet ﷺ does something. Another one was taqreer, which was mentioned. The Prophet ﷺ approves of something that's done in his presence or that reaches him. He says it's okay, or he does not object to it. And four, anyone know the fourth one? Yeah, it's related to that. Manners? Right. So they call this a wasfun or a sifatun, a description of him. It could be a description of a physical description of him, it could be a physical description, or it could be a description of his conduct, his character. Those are descriptions of him. So these are the four things. So in this phrase here, we have two things. It says he himself began the month of fasting. So if he himself began, that means he did something. That falls under something he did, which is an amal. And he instructed the people to begin. So that means he said something, right? He said something. So that would be a qawl. So these are the two things here that we see in this statement. Those are two aspects of, or two components of the definition of a hadith or the sunnah according to the scholars of hadith. We will move on to the narration or hadith number 530. And since some more people came in, I just wanted to, I'll say this, we said at the beginning, for those who are not aware, there's a short link by which you can access the handout that I'm currently going through. And that short link is tiny.cc/BM fast. BM is Bulughul al-Maram, and fast is for fasting, which is what the lesson subject is. Tiny, Tiny, .cc/BMFAST. We'll move on to number 530. And in the handout, we have a little X, a superscript X written there next to the number. We wrote that to indicate that this hadith was graded inauthentic at the level of da'if by Sheikh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani. May Allah have mercy upon him. So this says here, عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أن أعرابيا جاء. I'm sorry, my page jumped here for a minute. عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أن أعرابيا جاء إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال إني رأيت الهلال فقال أتشهد أن لا إله إلا الله قال نعم قال أتشهد أن محمدا رسول الله قال نعم قال فأذن في الناس يا بلال أن يصوموا غدا. Like we said, this hadith was graded inauthentic at the level of da'if. So he wrote here, it was attributed to Abdullah ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with both of them, that he said, a Bedouin came to the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, and said, I saw the new moon marking the beginning of Ramadan. This is one person again. Similar to the scenario with Abdullah ibn Umar that preceded in a hadith that was authentic. In this hadith here, the inauthentic one, the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, asked him, do you testify that there is none worthy of worship except Allah? The man replied, yes. The Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, further asked him, do you testify that Muhammad is Allah's messenger? The man replied, yes. The Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, then gave the instruction, Bilal, announce to the people that they are to begin fasting tomorrow. In our note regarding this hadith, we said here, this hadith was graded inauthentic in the copy of Bulughh al-Maram that we are using for these lessons. The previous authentic hadith, narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with both of them, established the idea that it is acceptable to begin the month of fasting based on the testimony or information given by one single individual. And the same may be understood from this inauthentic hadith, but we're not using this one as our basis. We were using as our basis the previous one, because that one was authentic. This is as much as we'll say from about 530. And I guess I can also point out here that, like I said, the gradings we're using here are the ones attributed to a Sheikh al-Albani in the copy of Bulugh al-Maram that we're using for these lessons. But for those of you who read a little bit more, might use other works of a Sheikh al-Albani and other scholars of hadith, you may find that some of them, they grade this hadith as on the whole, not specifically from Ibn Abbas, but the concept as a whole. They grade this hasanun li ghayrihi because there is more than one hadith that mentions this concept in a similar scenario from other companions, not from Ibn Abbas if I remember correctly. And some of the scholars, they grade the idea, that idea about the person coming and testifying La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, they grade this idea as being something that is hasanun li ghayrihi, and Allah knows best. But for this hadith in particular, like we said, this hadith on its own was graded inauthentic at the level of da'if. We'll move on to 531. This has two sort of parts to it. The first one says, عن حفصة أم المؤمنين رضي الله عنها عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من لم يبيت الصيام قبل الفجر فلا صيام له. Hafsa, يرحمك الله. Hafsa, one of the mothers of the people of Iman, may Allah be pleased with her, narrated that the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, said, if a person did not have the intention at some point during the night prior to the arrival of dawn that he would fast the following day, there is no fasting for him. I'll read that again. If a person did not have the intention at some point during the night prior to the arrival of dawn, that he would fast the following day, there's no fasting for him. We said here as well, another narration of the hadith contains the wording, La siyama liman lam yafridhu min al-layli. There is no fasting for someone who does not intend during the night to fast the following day. Now, this hadith, we understand something from it. We'll comment about that. But to get a properly contextualized understanding of this hadith, we need to understand this one in light of the next one. But we'll read a comment here before we go on. We wrote here in footnote number 1 that we understand from this, talking about hadith number 531, we understand from this that a person's fasting is not considered valid without the intention to do so preceding it at some point during the night, which begins once the sun sets. Now I want to emphasize something here that I emphasized earlier. Remember the definition we talked about when we said what fasting is? What's the first thing that we said in that definition? That fasting is an act of worship. Good. It's an act of worship. What's something that makes an action an act of worship? Right. Okay? So you have to remember that. This is something that you're doing because Allah has prescribed it, and you're doing it seeking nearness to Him, seeking His reward, seeking to fulfill the obligations that He has prescribed. And in addition to that, you're doing it in the manner that was done by His final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it says here, we understand from this that a person's fasting is not considered valid without the intention to do so preceding it at some point during the night, which begins once the sun sets. That intention is made in one's heart, and Islam's teachings do not prescribe declaring that intention by way of words. One of the views held by the scholars is that, this is specifically for Ramadan now, right? What we said just now is about fasting in general, whether Ramadan or not, but with specific reference to Ramadan, this is what we're going to discuss now. So one of the views held by the scholars is that if a person intends to fast the month of Ramadan, and he has that intention at any point during the night before the first day of fasting begins, that's your intention before the first day of fasting, that suffices as the intention for fasting the entire month. This is the view some scholars hold. All right? This is because the various individual acts of worship that are part of Ramadan could be considered all together like one single act of worship. Just like a prayer is one single act of worship made up of various parts. So this is something to keep in mind. And like we said, I'm saying this is one of the views held by the scholars because there are others as well. We're not going to go into all that discussion right now. We just wanted to draw attention to this detail to keep it in mind. We added here that even eating during the night in Ramadan. Now, again, this is going back to the issue about the intention and when an action becomes an act of worship. We wrote here, even eating during the night in Ramadan is an act of worship since it is to be done for the purpose of having strength to fast during the day. So this is something which, if you keep that as your intention, you keep that within your heart when you eat even. Not just while you fast, you refrain from eating, but even when you eat. This is something, if you keep that as part of your intention, knowing that my purpose of eating right now, in this month, during the night, is so that I'm going to be able to fast tomorrow because that's wajib for me. That eating, with that intention and that understanding, becomes an act of worship by Allah's permission, for which a person would be rewarded and by which a person could be able to draw closer to Allah. We will move on now to Hadith 532. And Hadith 532 will be the last one that we want to cover in this session. Then we'll have a bit of review and then we'll take a short break. 532 says, عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت دخل علي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات يوم فقال هل عندكم شيء؟ قلنا لا. قال فإني إذن صائم. ثم أتانا يوما آخر فقلنا أهدي لنا حيس فقال أرينيه فلقد أصبحت صائما فأكل. So before we go for the English, I'm just going to point out a couple of other things regarding how you read a hadith in Arabic, all right? We pointed out the one thing here. If you're going to read it, even though it's not written, there's a couple words I'm going to tell you. So this is the Arabic texts for 532. It says, An Aishata radiyallahu anha. Here we would say, Annaha qalat, if we're reading it the proper way. Annaha qalat, so we would add that there, verbally, even though it's not written. Then, if we skip down, let's skip down to the second line. It begins with the word la, the second line. It says, Qala, this is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is speaking. Qala فَإِنِّي إِذًا صَائِمٌ. After that, who's talking? Inni idan sa'imun. These are the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then when it says thumma atana yawman akhara, who's talking there? Aisha. Good. When you read a hadith, the way you're supposed to read it. Like I said, I'm reading the text here for simplicity, the way it's written. When you read a hadith properly, does anybody know what you're supposed to do between the words sa'imun and thumma? You're supposed to say something. Anyone? No? I thought I heard somebody whisper something. Yes. You're supposed to say qalat here. That means that she said. So you understand who's talking. So you're supposed to read this qala فَإِنِّي إِذًا صَائِمٌ قالت ثم أتانا يوما آخر فقلنا له أهدي لنا حيس فقال أرينيه فلقد أصبحت صائما. And again here, you're supposed to say قالت again. قالت فأكل. Meaning, Aisha said, then he then ate. All right? That's just something to note. It's a little bit of a digression from our topic, but this is how, inshallah, like I said, bi-idhnillah, by Allah's permission, as the lessons for teaching hadith continue, I'm sure this will be brought up again when we start reading hadith together, and I'm sure maybe that might have been done already, and Allah knows best. So the English here we said, Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, said, the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grand protection, had once entered my dwelling and asked, do you have anything here to eat? We replied, no. He said, in that case, I will fast. Then he came to us on another day, and we told him, we were gifted a dish made from dates mixed with some fat and dehydrated yogurt. He said, bring it for me to see. I had indeed began the day fasting. And he then ate. Like in English, it's clear because we have quotation marks to write here, and we even kind of use some punctuation in the Arabic to sort of denote who's speaking. But when reading in Arabic, inshallah, keep the detail we mentioned in mind. Here we see something that happened in contrast to the situation with what Hafsa narrated. Here the Prophet ﷺ comes to Aisha, and here this is in the daytime. This is in the daytime. And he's asking about if there's food, and then he makes the decision to fast. So this is a different scenario from what Hafsa said, because Hafsa's hadith says that you need to have the intention to fast before Fajr time, and this is happening after Fajr time. So how do the scholars put these narrations together? We said here that in, footnote number, which one are you on right now? Footnote number 2. It says, right, for the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, in that case, I will fast. We said here in footnote number 2, it is on page 4, this can be understood to mean that for non-obligatory fasting, it is permissible to intend to fast even after the beginning of the day that one wants to fast, provided that one has not done anything since the beginning of the day that breaks one's fast. So long as you have not done anything that breaks the fast as yet, you can intend to fast for the remainder of the day if the fast is optional, right? Non-obligatory. Good. This is the basis for that understanding. This is how the scholars put these together. We said the previous hadith from Hafsa, may Allah be pleased with her, can be understood as only applicable to obligatory fasting. This is how they put these together. Just quickly here, we added a note about this word haisun, because we wrote in English here, dates mixed with some fat and dehydrated yogurt. We added a note here about dehydrated yogurt. We said this is the way we chose to express the Arabic term aqitun, aqit. The term essentially refers to yogurt that is preserved by being dried into solid, hard chunks, which can then subsequently be used in cooking. We're mentioning this because there are other ahadith that have this word in it, aqitun. This is still a substance that's used in various parts of the world currently. For those of us who are city dwellers, I guess we don't know about these things. But for other people, maybe some of you here are not city dwellers, even though you might be around in an urban environment. Some of you might know about these things. All right, at the end here also, we said the latter portion of the hadith, when it says that, see, the Prophet ﷺ, it says that Aisha mentioned that he came to us on another day and we told him we were gifted a dish made from dates mixed with some fat and dehydrated yogurt. He said, bring it for me to see. I had indeed began the day fasting, but then he did what? He ate. He was fasting and he ate. So what do we understand from this? In footnote number 4, we say the latter portion of the hadith is understood to mean that if someone is fasting a non-obligatory fast, it is permissible for him to break his fast if he wants to, even without any need or excuse. Okay? If it's an optional fast, if it's non-obligatory, it's permissible to do that. It's not wrong. It's not a sin. You don't have to make it up. That's okay. And this hadith shows us that. All right? Okay, this will be the end of our first session. I have some, for those who have the handout, the practice I like to have is at the end of a lesson, I like to have some review. And my policy with the review is it's open book. Okay, it's open book. You don't have to remember everything. If you want to look back, we can look back. So we're going to go through these here, and then we'll break for a little bit, inshallah. Number 1, we have, what does as-siyam, fasting, refer to according to Islam's teachings? What does as-siyam refer to according to Islam's teachings? Anyone? If no one knows, okay, I'll do the open book for you, if anyone wants to know where it is. What's that?
Can you repeat that question?
Sorry?
Can you repeat that question?
What does fasting refer to according to Islam's teachings? If you look on page number 1, right, according to Islam's teachings, let's see, the definition that we wrote was footnote number 2 on page number 1. Footnote number 2 on page number 1. That's where the definition, that's what we're looking for in this question. We said fasting in Islam refers to worshiping Allah by willfully refraining throughout the daytime, beginning at dawn and ending at sunset, that's what daytime is, from eating, drinking, intercourse, and other things that a fasting person is prohibited from, as outlined in the texts of Islam. This is basically what we want to understand fasting is. Worshipping Allah by willfully refraining throughout the daytime from things that break your fast. That's 4 basic elements. Worshipping Allah, willfully refraining, it's done in the day only, and it's from specific things, right? Those are the 4 components of that definition. Number 2, we have next, when did fasting, we said part, I put here part of the answer is not in the lesson, meaning in the handout. Part of this answer is not in the handout, but part of it is. When did fasting Ramadan become obligatory in Islam? What did we say about that? Was that a hand? Good. The 2nd year after Hijrah. Next part of the question says, how many Ramadans were fasted by the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection, and the Muslims during his lifetime? 9. Good. Number 3, what general prohibition can be understood from hadith number 526? What's the general prohibition in that hadith? Anyone? The general prohibition was?
That you cannot fast the day before Ramadan or the 2 days before.
Right. The day before, the second last day of Sha'ban, or the last day of Sha'ban. These 2 days, there's a general prohibition. A general prohibition that you don't do that. Now, why might someone, number 4, why might someone do something that contravenes that prohibition?
He was already fasting beforehand, the Monday and Thursday fast.
I know what you're trying to say, but check out the question. Why might you do something? The prohibition says, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay? Why might someone do it? Because of the day of doubt. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Right. If it was cloudy on the night before the 30th, then you can't see if the crescent is really there. So it might be, it might not be, you don't know. So a person might say to themselves, oh no, well, you know what? Maybe tomorrow might really be Ramadan, but I didn't see the moon. In a situation like that, we said that's not what you're supposed to do, right? The hadith told us what to do, but that's why someone might do what contravenes the prohibition. Okay, let's come back over there. It says it mentioned one exception to the prohibition. An exception, what was it? Good. If you have a regular practice of fasting specific days, and those days coincide with the day before Ramadan or the 2 days before it, then you're permitted. That's the only exception. All right. What number are we on right now? Number 6. How many days does a lunar month contain?
29 at the least, 30 at the most.
Wonderful. 29 at the least, 30 at the most. So it's either 29 or 30. Only 2 possibilities. What does the term Yawm al-Shakki, the day about which there is doubt, mean in the context of Hadith 527? Why is it called that? And what are circumstances that could cause the doubt that was referred to? Now, the brother with the elaboration he gave us, he already kind of answered that, right? We can reiterate. What does it mean in the context of Hadith 527? What does the day about which there is doubt mean? And why is it called that?
Is the 30th of Sha'ban?
Hold on a second. Hold on. The young man has his hand up.
The 30th of Sha'ban, the moon is not sighted because it's like obscured by clouds.
Good. So the understanding, as he said there, is the day about which there is doubt is it's the 30th of Sha'ban in the event that the moon was obscured the night before. That's called the day about which there is doubt. Why is it called that? Why is it called that? Does the young man want to continue? Oh, he's taking notes. All right. Why is it called that? Did I see a hand over here just now?
Because they don't know, because the crescent might be there.
Right. The moon might have actually been there. The crescent might have been there, but you don't know because you didn't see it with your own eyes. And what are circumstances that could cause the doubt that was referred to? Clouds, possibly. Anything else? It doesn't always have to be clouds. It depends.
Sandstorm.
Sandstorm, definitely. Where we are, what snowstorm, right? Maybe the clouds. I mean, the clouds might be above where the snow is. So the clouds might be the case there too. But definitely something like a sandstorm, there are no clouds involved there, right? Precipitation might involve clouds, but sand, no. All right, number 8. It can be understood from the parts of Hadith 528 that there are 2 basic methods to determine when to begin each lunar month. What are those methods? Anyone? 2 basic methods. Say again, I'm sorry? Either the moon is seen, you see the crescent, or you complete Sha'ban as how many days? 30 days, good. Those are the 2 methods that we have. The next point the next question was number 9. When the 29th day of a lunar month concludes, 29th day concludes, what might the state of the sky be with respect to seeing the new moon? There are basically 2 things. on any given night, what can the sky be like?
Clear or not clear?
Right, it's either clear or it's not. It's clear enough for you to see the moon, or it's not. Those are the two scenarios you have. What should be done if a new moon is not sighted in either of those states? What's that?
After completing the shower.
Right. You say that the next day is the 30th of Sha'ban, period. If the sky is clear, or something's obscuring, if it's clear enough to see the moon, or not clear enough to see the moon, and you don't see it, next day is the 30th of Sha'ban, and that's the way that you take it, without any feeling of, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. Not like that. Next, number 11. What words were authentically narrated from the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, concerning seeing a new moon, and who is addressed in those words? What are the words? Anybody remember? These are at the bottom of page 2 on to over to page 3 in the footnotes. And then? Good. Jazakallahu khairan. So, in those words, who's being addressed? Well, the first part says, Allahumma. So you're addressing Allah, right? And the second part says, Rabbi wa Rabbuka. That's the moon, right? So this whole thing, there are two things being addressed here. The first is Allah. But the latter part from Rabbi wa Rabbuka Allah, that part, the Prophet ﷺ there is addressing the moon. He's not making a dua there. He's stating a fact. All right, now, numbers, I'll scroll back down to where we were just now. We're on number what? 12?
Now it's 11.
Now it's 11? We did 11 just now. Yeah, we did 11 just now. All right. Number 12. What significance was mentioned regarding the concluding portion of those authentically narrated words? This is what you're saying just now. What significance was mentioned regarding the concluding portion? Rabbi wa Rabbuka Allah.
The Prophet ﷺ said it to remind the people and to tell Mushrikun if they're there that nothing is to be worshipped except Allah, and the moon is from the creations of Allah.
Right. Jazakallahu khairan. The piece that we said here, we said by making that remark, he annulled their beliefs, the beliefs of those who had worshipped the moon or devoted some amount of worship to the moon anyway. Annulled their beliefs and stated that the moon is just like any human in the sense that it is under the control of its one supreme Lord, Allah, and unable to bring about any sort of harm or benefit. The only one who deserves all worship is Allah alone. Number 13. What basic idea can be understood from Hadith 529 regarding beginning the month of fasting when the new moon is sighted? And what two ways were mentioned to prove that idea? Hadith 529, who narrated that one? Ibn Umar, good. That was the situation when he came and said that he saw it. So we said here, what's the basic idea to understand from that hadith? Good. One person is enough. One person is enough when it comes to beginning the month of Ramadan. One person's sighting is enough. What two ways were mentioned to prove that idea from that hadith? This was regarding the definition of the hadith. What were the two ways? Good. Amalun and then the qawlan. Because the first one is the Prophet ﷺ himself fasted. And then he instructed, meaning he told them to fast. Or he told at least someone to convey that instruction to the people. So that's both an action and a statement ascribed to the Prophet ﷺ. May Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection. Number 14. It can be understood from 531a and 531b that fasting any given day is not considered valid without the intention to fast already being present at some point during the night before that day begins. All right? What view do some scholars hold about how this relates to fasting the days of Ramadan, and what rationale was given? This is the hadith narrated by who? Hafsa radiyallahu anha, may Allah be pleased with her. Good. So, what view do some scholars hold about how this relates to fasting Ramadan? Anyone? Is that a hand?
If you make it before Ramadan, you can treat the fasting Ramadan as one act of worship. So one intention would be enough.
Good. What rationale was given?
That it's treated as one ibadah.
Exactly. So, Jazakallahu khairan. The brother's mentioning that one of the views the scholars hold is that so long as a person has the intention before the first day of Ramadan begins, he knows he's going to be fasting the whole month ahead, that's enough. And the rationale is that the whole month itself, the whole month of fasting, can be treated like one act of worship. Just like a prayer, it's one act of worship and it has a bunch of parts. It has several parts to make it up. Ramadan can be treated, fasting Ramadan can be treated as one act of worship that has a number of individual parts. So long as you have the intention prior to that, that suffices. Number 15, fasting as prescribed by Islam's directives is an act of worship. What type of act can eating during the night become, and when can it become such an act?
Act of worship and become for obligatory.
It can become an act of worship
If you have the intention that you are eating it, so you have enough energy for the next day.
Exactly, good. So I put those two answers together. It can become an act of worship when you have the intention that your eating is for the purpose of fasting the following day of Ramadan, which is an obligation that Allah has prescribed. So you're fulfilling one of Allah's obligations, and your eating is your means to fulfilling that obligation. So with that intention, this would become an act of worship. Number 16, one idea understood from Hadith 532 is that a person can form the intention to fast any given day after that day begins, provided that he has not done anything since the beginning of the day that breaks his fast. How do some scholars reconcile between this meaning and the meaning that could be understood from 531? 532 tells us that...
It's for the non-obligatory.
Good. Okay. So 532 is understood as the ruling that pertains to non-obligatory fasting, and 531 is understood as the ruling that pertains to obligatory fasting. Last question, what idea pertaining to breaking one's fast is understood from 532? What's that? Any time of the day. Okay, that's true.
If it's not, you don't need any reason.
Right, good. So we put all those answers together. It can be done at any of the time, so long as you're fasting a non-obligatory fast, you can break your fast at any time of the day, and you are not required to have a specific reason for doing so. All right? This will be the end of lesson or session number 1. We'll take a break for about how long?
7 minutes, inshallah.
Okay.
Not too long, but inshallah.
All right, and then inshallah we'll resume session 2 after that. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.